Our last speaker before we head off for morning tea, coffee, is Martin Fryer. Martin Fryer is the Sustainability Manager with Auckland Airport. Auckland Airport and Waterfront Auckland approached us in parallel, separately, to pilot the IS tool for their own respective reasons. And certainly from Martin's perspective, it was strategic. It is both corporate all the way through. I know he's going to present about it, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but the intelligence, the manner we've seen, the way Auckland Airport engages corporately with their supply chain and so on, is very much all about why industry came together to develop the tool in the first place. It is more than just ratings. It's far more than that, and I think Martin's a shining example of that, so thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anthony, and thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. Before I get into the presentation, I just want to touch on some of the messages that have come through from earlier presentations this morning, because the issues that you're facing here in terms of infrastructure development and availability of workforce are exactly the same in New Zealand, particularly in Auckland. We have been working very closely with central and local government on this issue. We've been looking at workforce planning. We're starting to do that for the whole of the airport master plan that's looking out to 2044. So we actually understand as a key piece of infrastructure what our workforce needs are going to be over the next few decades. Some really interesting findings have already come out of the research. In South Auckland, there are apparently 10,000 unemployed people, very close to Auckland Airport. Only 500 of those have any sort of trades, training, or skills. 3,000 of those are blue-collar workers, and out of that 10,000, only 7 have a full driving license. So it's not just about finding people to employ, it's actually getting the wraparound services put in place to make sure that they're work ready and able to take up opportunities that we are certainly going to provide for them. In terms of the content of the presentation, I'll just give you some key facts about Auckland Airport. Look at the initial drivers for the sustainability program and what are some of the internal outcomes within the business for that. Talk about our performance, which we've tried hard to benchmark over the years. Then look at the master plan and the opportunity that provided us to rethink our whole approach to sustainable development. Talk briefly about our operational rating, which we were delighted to receive the certificate for yesterday evening, and the next steps, because as already been mentioned, it's always about continual improvement. So Auckland Airport is a key gateway into New Zealand. We welcome and farewell 75% of all international visitors. In FY15, we processed 15.8 million passengers. That was just shy of a 6% increase on the year before, and early indications are that it's going to be another 6% increase this financial year. So that trend is up. Our planning previously was basically we could guarantee a 3% increase each year in terms of passenger numbers. That looks as if it's doubling. So that presents us with a bit of an opportunity, but also a headache in terms of how do we deliver that infrastructure in time for these passengers arriving. We are without doubt the first and last impressions of New Zealand for the majority of visitors. And one of the things that I constantly reflect on is how do you actually present an airport to passengers and present it in a way where they actually appreciate the effort you're going into to make the infrastructure sustainable. If anybody's got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. In terms of an organisation, we're fairly small, 340 full-time staff, but there are 14,000 people coming out to the airport every day. That's just to work. That number is going to increase. The projection is by the end of the master plan, which looks out to 2044, we might have 99,000 people coming out to the airport just to work. So that's the equivalent to Auckland's central business district at the moment. So it's a significant increase that we need to plan for. Our revenue last financial year was 508 million. If you look at our free float market capitalisation, we are currently the largest corporate business in New Zealand. We've just announced this morning that we've had to adjust our capital expenditure forecast because of this need for further development. We might actually be spending anywhere between 12 and 20% additional capital in FY16 because of this growth. But let me take you right back in terms of setting the scene. The driver for sustainability at Auckland Airport was without doubt carbon and climate change. In 1997, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change produced a specific report on the impact of global aviation on global greenhouse gas emissions. It suggested that at that time, aviation was contributing between 2 and 3% to global greenhouse gas emissions, but it was predicted to rise to 5% by 2025. So by 2025, aviation was going to be a material contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. That obviously had implications for long-haul tourism and trade, particularly as there were various responses in various jurisdictions to dealing with carbon. Emissions trading schemes were coming in Europe. Domestically, New Zealand was building an emissions trading scheme, and obviously that would bring a price of carbon into the economy, and that could have negatively impacted on the aviation sector. In terms of trade, we had Buttergate. We have a very strong dairy sector. We export huge amounts of dairy product around the globe, including Anchor butter, which is exported to the UK and Europe. And the manufacturers in the UK were taking out full-page advertisements in the press saying, why buy Anchor butter, which has been shipped halfway around the world, when you can source the product from a local manufacturer? So we had Buttergate. All these issues were basically highlighted in a strategic risk review that the company did in 2005. Interesting that it's 10 years ago. It's before I joined the business. But the driver was carbon, and 10 years later, we're all sitting waiting with bated breath to see what comes out of the Paris negotiations in December around a global response to that same issue. So the company decided to appoint a sustainability advisor. I was very fortunate to get that role in 2007. And I worked with the executive and the company to produce our first sustainability policy in 2008. Alongside that, we had a 5-year action plan looking out and setting the business targets out to 2012. We tried to follow international best practice. We went out to our stakeholders at that time, and I have to say the response was pretty low. The awareness of sustainability was low within the airlines, it was low within airports, it was low actually within the community and all our stakeholders. They were aware of the word, but they were actually grappling to understand what it meant to them as individuals, let alone what it meant to large corporates like Auckland Airport and their view of what we should be doing about it. In 2012, when we produced our second policy, we did that same stakeholder exercise, and the level of engagement had improved exponentially. The awareness around sustainability was far higher across all our stakeholders. So I like to think the first policy was very much internally driven by the business. The second one, far more driven by our stakeholders and ability for us to meet stakeholder expectations. We've currently got targets out to 2020. I managed to get 20% by 2020 targets signed off by the executive. I did talk about 80% targets. They were a little bit hesitant about that. But we managed to keep that 80% figure as an aspirational goal. And that has actually proved really useful because, as you will see later in the presentation, we've already achieved some of our 2020 targets. So we don't have to say, well, what do we do now? We actually fall back on the fact that we've already got an aspirational goal of 80% reductions for energy, water and waste. So our first policy identified 14 material issues across the business. We set ourselves 41 targets, and they were included in a first 5-year action plan, which ran from 2008 to 2012. And we achieved 73% of those targets. So it was a really good first effort. That included a 5% reduction in our operational carbon footprint. Between FY12 and FY14, under our new policy and strategy, we've actually achieved a 13% reduction in total energy consumption. Our 20% waste minimisation target has already been achieved. It was achieved at the end of FY14, well ahead of the 2020 target, and water consumption has come down by 8%. The blue graph that you can see there is the benefit of introducing LED technology. We had a significant lighting upgrade project in the international terminal. It went over a couple of years, but essentially we changed out 750 light fittings, put in LEDs, we put in dimmable T5, so fluorescence. It's a mixture of technologies. The important thing is we also introduced the smart technology. So we didn't just change the light fittings, we put in control systems that actually mean that, as an example, behind a check-in desk, if there's nobody sitting in a seat behind a check-in desk, the lights can dim down. So they're only using 20% of the energy. It's still on, it's still light, it's still showing that we're open for business, but we're actually only using 20% of the energy. Somebody comes in and sits behind that desk, there's a sensor there that puts the lights up, but by measuring the light required for the task, the lights come up, but they're still only using 60%. So we're saving 40%, and it's still providing enough task lighting. So the reductions that we've achieved, obviously, if you put LEDs in, then it's common knowledge, your energy consumption goes down by 50% overnight. If you put in the smart technology, the reductions we've seen there are up at 73% across the whole of the land side of the international terminal. The graph at the back was actually produced through our operational pilot, so this is one of the benefits of going through that process with ISCA, producing your base case and the projections out. This actually goes out to 2040 and looking at the business as usual energy consumption as opposed to if you take the sustainable approach and what is the difference between the two, the area under the curve. It proved incredibly useful for me because I was actually asked to produce a board report in August about the benefits of continuing on this kind of sustainability journey. So actually working with ISCA and taking this approach has had a real benefit for me in terms of communicating sustainability at the executive level. In terms of our performance around carbon, over the last 3 years, we've avoided just shy of 3,000 tonnes of carbon from our operations. It's a 23% reduction in our total carbon footprint. On a per passenger basis, that's a 29% reduction. And we had a 20% by 2020 intensity reduction target. Obviously, we've hit that one out of the park. Importantly, over the past few years, we've gone for CMARS accreditation. So this is external audit and verification of our carbon performance. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. The recognition that we've received, we've been disclosing our carbon footprint through the Carbon Disclosure Project since 2006, publicly disclosing it since 2007. We've been in the FTSE for Good investment indices, sustainable investment indices, since 2008. And we were the first New Zealand-owned company to make it into the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, Asia-Pacific region, in 2012, and we've maintained our inclusion in that index. The CMAR certification we've done because it actually adds value to your submissions to these sustainable investment indices. The Dow Jones send you a questionnaire each year to fill out, and I think the first year we did it was 75 pages. This year it's gone up to 134 pages. So it's a fairly intensive scrutiny of your environmental, social and governance practices. But it's really useful in terms of guiding the business in looking of ways of improving your sustainability of performance across those areas. The CMARS accreditation helps with that. And now having got the ISCA operational pilot rating, we will be able to put that into our Dow Jones submission, which will be next year. So hopefully that will help us maintain our inclusion in that index. In 2014, we produced a master plan, and this really kind of prompted a review of our approach to sustainability, because historically our disclosure had always been around our operational boundaries. We could nicely draw a boundary around where we operated and look for reductions, and we'd had some fantastic successes around that. But a master plan is a master plan for the whole airport campus, not just the infrastructure that we own and operate, but we've got a thriving property portfolio. We're building essentially a mini city out there, and we are looking for the long term out to 2044 and beyond. So that's when we had to review our thinking, and I looked at various infrastructure rating tools, including Sequel and BREEAM from the UK, and Vision and Green Lights from the US. And I then came across ISCA, and I did the ISAP training last year. And the tool really fitted our thinking and approach to how we could embed sustainability into the business. So we've done the pilot operation for airport infrastructure. When I took the idea to the executive, their response was, do we actually really need another badge? Haven't you got enough? And I said, well, don't worry about the rating. The rating is, yeah, if we get it, that's great. But we've always struggled to benchmark ourselves. And what the IS rating allows us to do is actually say, well, we've come out as commended. That's kind of where we expected to be. But we now understand what's required if we want to be seen as excellent or leading edge. So it provides you with that gap. And now I need to get on to doing a review of the outcomes of that operational rating and provide that intelligence back into the business. The result will hopefully be a comprehensive environmental, social and governance framework, which will assist us with submissions to the Dow Jones. The rating aspects obviously also allow you to prioritize areas for improvement. We do fantastic work around energy efficiency and reducing carbon, but we haven't really had a comprehensive look at climate change adaptation. That's been highlighted through the ISCA rating. We think we do stakeholder consultation really, really well. And it's going to be increasingly important as we expand in the future. We're going to need changes to our designation as an airport to actually allow us to build a longer northern runway to cope with the big code-F aircraft that we're increasingly having to accommodate. Stakeholder consultation is going to be really, really crucial for us. It's all about our social license to operate. So we're delighted that there is an appetite and interest from other New Zealand and Australian airports around the ISCA tool, and if we get more through the rating, then obviously we can start benchmarking ourselves with other airports. So as I said, we've got to review the outcomes of the operational pilot. We're currently looking at doing a design pilot for the next stage of international terminal expansion. We're just kicking off a 1,400 square metre expansion of the international terminal. It has already started to raise awareness within our supply chain. The lead contractor on that construction project is Fletcher Construction, but in our work looking at workforce planning, we're also talking to other major contractors, Hawkins, and the training people within South Auckland and across the supply chain. We certainly now have the opportunity to review how to embed sustainability to airport development, and not just the airport or aeronautical infrastructure, but the entire airport campus. We're going to need to build roads, electricity networks, sewage pipelines, stormwater, you name it, and the IS rating tool can be applied across those different construction projects, so we can continue to raise the bar. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to present, and enjoy your morning tea.
I'm always overwhelmed by Martin's modesty. Thank you, Martin.